Welcome everybody, welcome back to Mystic Times. This is Rafa, and today I have the great pleasure and the great honor to have with me a great research on the topic of Atlantis, which is, as we were speaking just now before we started recording, it's a topic that's very close to my heart. It's a topic that I find extremely, not just fascinating, but also I think, and we'll probably get into that, I think it's a very relevant topic for the times we're living today. So without further ado, Marco Vigato, thank you for being there. How are you?
Good. Thank you very much, Rafa, for having me on the show.
Awesome. It's a great chance that I get. I found you through Coast to Coast AM. I think you were recently on the show, and yeah, immediately I was like, oh, okay, so they're talking about Atlantis. Let's check this out. I had a listen, not to the whole interview, but immediately it caught my attention, and I found it also very interesting that you are from Italy. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. I'm originally from Italy, from Milan, but I've been living in Mexico for the past 6 years now.
Oh, so we're pretty close. I'm in Montevideo, Uruguay, in the south, and my last name is Martinelli, which is also from Italy. That's why I found the connection pretty interesting.
Right.
Yeah, my ancestors, the original Martinelli that came here to Uruguay, I think he came in the 1800s, like 1820 or so. So there's a connection there, and my people, I think they're from near Genoa. The city is called La Igueglia. It's a small like coastal town, and yeah, I found it like first of all that connection with the Italian thing was pretty interesting for me. So Atlantis, what a great topic, right? My first question, let me just ask you, how did you get into this kind of research? What made it a topic that interested you or that made you fascinated you even?
Yes, so I think from a very early age, I started visiting archaeological sites. My father is an archaeologist, so we're like very old visiting and traveling throughout both Europe, the Middle East, North Africa, by exploring first of all, like most of the classical sites, but then also starting to see more of the megalithic sites. And I think that's what really caught my attention in the first place. Being in places like Giza, for instance, like seeing all these incredible works of ancient civilizations around Egypt, around the Middle East. I think that's when I started to really get interested also in alternative views of history. I started to come to a realization that the traditional, the mainstream paradigm of history, as we're all taught in schools, was fundamentally flawed. It might be missing a fundamental episode of a civilization. That's what prompted my initial interest in the question of Atlantis, lost civilization. So literally spent probably the past 15 years researching the subject of ancient lost civilization, the subject of Atlantis specifically, both by searching for the sources, so for all kind of documentary evidence through historical sources, esoteric sources as well, and then through my own personal exploration, visiting probably hundreds of archaeological sites on pretty much each one of the 5 continents, really.
That's amazing. I think so, and again, I wanna point out that the reason that the Italian connection between us calls my attention, and we can get maybe into this probably a little later because it's a bit, perhaps it's part of the, well, you will tell me, but perhaps this is part of more like a deeper part of the research, and not just the surface part, which is how the Atlantean civilization is connected to so much of our Western culture, and we don't even know it because the Atlantean civilization has been lost to time and has been turned into kind of a myth. And so what I mean by this is it's interesting how at some point the civilization, or maybe in different points, there were migrations, correct? To let's say, for example, that this civilization was located in the Atlantis, just as a first like attempt at at a geographical exploration of the topic, they were probably in the Atlantic, therefore the name, and they moved towards, on the one side, America, and on the other side, Europe, and then towards Asia, etc. But also, I think it's interesting that we find symbols, right? Symbols like the very demonized or feared swastika symbol. And for some reason, I also chose to wear this because probably the flower of life, right? It's probably something that's also connected to this. But so through a certain moment of migrations, there's ideas of Atlantean civilization going to Egypt, but there's also ideas of them going to Persia, to India, and from there maybe moving along that region and going into Italy as well. And that's why I find the Italian connection relevant, because I'm pretty sure the roots or part of the roots of the Italian civilization have something to do with that, probably connected to, who knows, to the Celts or right, and similar stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and as you say, it was a global, worldwide seafaring culture. And so we find actually evidence and vestiges of Atlantean colonization on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean. But I definitely think that the Western civilization in particular is heavily indebted towards Atlantis. So the whole myth, if you think it's a myth or story of Atlantis, it's really foundational to Western civilization, and particularly also to the Western esoteric tradition as well. If you think about how it went on to influence so many different schools of thoughts and philosophical traditions in the West, starting with Plato, but even before the time of Plato as well. So there is an idea of cyclical time, there's an idea of multiple stages, multiple epochs of creation, cycles of creation. It's really foundational to Western civilization. So I really do think, and as you say, also in the case of particularly Mediterranean Europe as well, including Italy, there is also this idea of multiple migrations from Atlantis into the Mediterranean, into Europe. Of course, some of these migrations were called or became known under different names. They were called the Pelagians, for instance, the Sea Peoples. But I think these were all essentially different names of the same culture that spread from its primeval mid-Atlantic homeland towards the coast of both Europe and the Old World and the New World as well.
Yeah, and what was the name of that seafaring culture you mentioned just now?
It's called the Pelagians. So the Pelagians are one of those semi-mythical peoples that are mentioned very frequently, actually, in the classical sources by the ancient Greek and Roman authors and historians. They're described as essentially a seafaring culture, the first inhabitants of the lands of Italy, of Greece, before the arrival of the Indo-Europeans. They were also considered to be the original builders of much of the megalithic architecture that you find in these lands. If you think about these impressive polygonal stonework, the polygonal walls of Greece, of Italy, of Turkey as well, they suggest that the same culture was actually responsible for their creation. These migrations actually spanned and extended over several thousands of years. So it was not just a single episode, it was several waves of migration. This is actually something I suggest in the book. They were largely driven by geological instability in the mid-Atlantic Ocean. There is actually very strong evidence that most, if not all, of these migrations actually originated in the Atlantic Ocean. Parts of that migration reached the Western European seaboard, where they gave rise to the great megalithic civilization of the British Islands, of northwestern France, for instance, but even as far south as North Africa, as Morocco. But then another part of that migration was to penetrate into the Mediterranean, where they colonized Italy, Greece, Turkey, and they might have gone as far as the Levant, as far as the Middle East, as Lebanon and Egypt, as well as late as the European Bronze Age, when the Pelagians also became identified with the Sea Peoples by the ancient Egyptians.
So therefore, probably connected to the Phoenicians.
As well, I think it's a distinct possibility that at least a part of the Phoenician heritage was also Pelagian and then Neo-Atlantean. Of course, the Phoenicians were also a Semitic people, so there were certainly different, several other components. There are like cultural components, ethnic components, but the area where the Phoenicians settled in the Levant, in Lebanon, was also a significant Neo-Atlantean stronghold, a significant Pelagian stronghold throughout much of the Neolithic period as late as the Bronze Age.
Yeah. So when you look at the ancient past, we tend to have this kind of idea that, okay, so like the Romans, the Greeks, the Indians, the Persians, the Egyptians, like just a handful of civilizations, the Mayans, whatever. But when you start researching and looking into it, it's like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of different cultural groups, or let's call them civilizations. I don't know the correct term, but you start looking at names and you like start investigating, and there's like hundreds of names of cultures that you don't have any idea who they were. We have this very like superficial knowledge of the past.
Yeah, as I say, it's very superficial. It's almost a very compressed view of the timeline of history. We are still taught in schools that civilization began at Sumer, let's say, with civilization of Mesopotamia, of Egypt, at least if we talk about Western civilization. But the reality is that even these cultures, they had traditions of like previous civilizations, previous cycles of civilization stretch back many thousands of years. So it's not surprising, for instance, that in the ancient records of Sumer, in the earliest Sumerian kings list, you find records of dynasties that stretch back tens of thousands of years, in the same way as in Egypt, that we have a pretty well-established chronology right now of what is called the dynastic period, starting around 5,000 years ago, or about 3,000 BC. However, the Egyptians, they also spoke about earlier cycles of creation, earlier dynasties. They included gods, demigods, the mythical Shemsu-Hor, that reigned for over 30,000 years in the past. These are very accurate records. And so many of these kings list, they go as far as recording the number of years, months, even days of reign of some of these kings. So, of course, like archaeologists, most like contemporary mainstream historians, they're quite selective in their approach, meaning they look at the historical part of that list, stretching as far back as 2000, 3000 BC, and they consider that as the basis of much of their chronologies of the ancient Near East, and they basically throw in the garbage bin everything else. So all these mentions of mythical dynasties, prehistoric dynasties, just say it's fairy tales. So let's forget about all of that. But it was clearly very important to this ancient civilization. There was really something foundational to their culture. They really believed that their civilization of the historical period, was really a legacy from a far greater antiquity.
Yeah, it feels like kind of a preferred method of scientism these days is to like put a whole bunch of something that they can't explain into the junk folder, right? The junk DNA, when doing scientific experiments, if there's stuff that's outside of the norm, then they can discard it and say, oh no, this was just an error in measurement or whatever.
But that can no longer be ignored. I think even just like up until a few decades ago, yes, we could have ignored that and dismissed it as fairy tales. But now we have evidence that advanced, sophisticated civilization existed on Earth as a early as the end of the last ice age. So we're talking about time over 10,000 years ago. That remarkably also coincides with the time frame that Plato provides for sinking and the final destruction of Atlantis. Now we have sites like Göbekli Tepe, for instance, that show that very advanced, sophisticated megalithic cultures existed thousands of years before mainstream archaeologists even considered possible. And that's irrefutable evidence. It's quite literally rewriting the paradigm of history as we speak.
Yeah. I'm trying to, because this is such a juicy topic and such a dense topic. There's so much that it seems like, for example, you mentioned we are taught, or we are told, the kind of beginnings of civilization comes from Mesopotamia, correct? From Babylon or Sumeria, stuff like that. And it feels like for some reason our mainstream history starts there. It like, if you think of the world today, for example, politically, you can see that there's different groups, there's different ideologies and ways of thinking and ways of, maybe we're all just searching for happiness and peace. We're all looking for the same thing, but through different opinions of how we should reach that place, right? Or maybe some extreme groups think like who should be given that happiness and that freedom and that peace. And it feels like through history, certain groups that we might say are, I don't know if they're necessarily large, but they're likely powerful or influential. They seem to have remained kind of in the shadows and still be influencing or moving certain pieces of this multidimensional chess across the world even today. Do you think there's something like that maybe happening?
Well, the thing is that even many of these ancient civilizations that you mentioned, they never actually claimed to have invented anything. When they talk about the origin of their culture, their civilization, their advanced science, mathematics, architecture, the calendar, they also talk about that as a gift of the gods in some way. And you have very similar myths actually from throughout the Middle East, with the story of the Anunnaki, for instance, the Ioannis, these culture heroes or like civilizing gods in a way that brought civilization to these lands. And very similar also in Central and South America with the story of Quetzalcoatl, Viracocha, Nupa. All these great culture heroes were credited with bringing quite literally the seeds of civilization to these lands. They were credited as being the inventors of agriculture, of the calendar, of mathematics. So that if you actually ask any one of these ancient cultures, where did their knowledge, their civilization come from, they would have told you that it came from these great culture heroes, civilizing gods. They came from somewhere else and brought this culture, this civilization already fully formed to these lands. And I think that's one of the great mysteries of the origin of civilization. Wherever we go, be it in Egypt, in Sumeria, think about the origins of the Maya calendar, for instance, all these great innovations, they appear already fully formed without any period of evolution or gestation. So I think that faced with this kind of evidence, the only possible explanation is that that knowledge was brought there from somewhere else. And the only possibility, again, if we analyze the myths, is that somewhere else must have been a now lost civilization of the last ice age, which I suggest is probably identical with Plato's Atlantis and was originally located in the mid-Atlantic Ocean.
Yeah. There's so many places I would like to go with this conversation. We could make a 100 episode series, because it's just amazing. Like everything you say like opens branches for in my mind of stuff that we could cover. But I'm gonna try to. I'm an Aquarian, so I'm very, very much interested and excited by exploring different ideas. But I'm gonna try to focus on something. So my question, that's something that I kind of wrote down that I wanted to ask, is, are we inside a window of time that directly connects to Atlantean times?
I think we are. I think we are. So again, if you go back to some of the ancient worldviews, this concept of cyclical time. So it's really like a process in which you have a golden age, then humanity goes through a process of decadence. The golden age gives way to a silver age, bronze age, iron age, almost in cyclical repetition. So that in a way, Atlantis represent the civilization of the last golden age. And if you look back at these ancient cosmologies and chronologies from the Hindu Vedas, various creation accounts from both the old world and the new world, they share a very similar worldview that we're currently at the dawn of a new golden age. So we've again gone through a full cycle, so that our civilization is just now exiting the depths of the Iron Age, being the lowest point of the cycle, and about to approach the beginning of a new golden age. So I do think that just because of that, there is a connection clearly with the Atlantean past that might be part of the reason why so many people are seeking answers in that past, just because Atlantis in a way represent the civilization of that last golden age. So if you think that we're also right now about to enter a new golden age of development, of evolution for mankind, it's quite natural to look back at that past for finding answers and guidance.
Yeah, we are like I think like all the knowledge that you personally must have. You said 15 years of research into this subject, correct? I've been looking into the subject on and off for many years as well, but more trying to like starting, because at first you kind of look at the subject because it's interesting, but it's a myth. It's like just a kind of a fairy tale that is used to talk about something else. But slowly and with the archaeological discoveries, etc., you start seeing, oh, it's a possibility. And so most recently, I've been looking into it for maybe 2 or 3 years, and already it's like so much information. And I can only imagine with 15 years of research and even going to these archaeological and megalithic places with this different perspective, how many things you must see in those places that perhaps an Egyptologist, an old school Egyptologist, might not even see some stuff that perhaps if you went to Egypt, you might see.
Yeah, and there are so many different sources, right? So on the one hand, you have what they call scientific Atlantology, which is really a search for the physical evidence of ancient lost civilizations. There you have the archaeological evidence, the geological evidence. For instance, I think this is, of course, like very, very important for any scientific pursuit or for scientific search of Atlantis. But then on the other hand, we cannot forget the importance of esoteric Atlantology, all the esoteric tradition around Atlantis. Again, starting with Plato's account, because Plato's account, even though it clearly had an historical foundation, it was still meant to be fundamentally an esoteric account, a philosophical story in a way. And that like chain of transmission, let's say, or that stream of esoteric Atlantology, it actually provides many valuable insights. Think about all the authors throughout the centuries that are written about the subject of Atlantis, coming to more recent times. Think about theosophy, anthroposophy as well, these different movements of the 18th, of the 19th and 20th century. Atlantis has really become like a foundational topic, almost a foundational myth of a Western civilization, or definitely a Western esotericism, at least. So whenever you approach the study of a subject as complex as Atlantis, I don't think you can ignore all the contributions from various esoteric disciplines, rather than just like focusing on the scientific aspects of it. And that's, I think, like a mistake that many authors of Atlantis have made. Like they choose either to focus on one or the other, meaning they're focused on the scientific evidence or the esoteric Atlantis. What they try to do in that book is really bridging these two perspectives, like creating a comprehensive picture of lost civilization that gathers evidence from both in ways that actually complement each other.
That's amazing, because when you bring up many important ideas, it's amazing because on the one hand, I don't want to forget, so you talked about the 19th century, I want to get back to that, but this bridging that you do in your book, precisely and I love, by the way, this idea of scientific Atlantology and esoteric Atlantology. I love that as a title for in your presentation card. But you mentioned this bridging, right? That's precisely kind of within the myth, or perhaps probably in the historical aspect of Atlantis. That's precisely what the Atlanteans got wrong, that separation. Like eventually they got that wrong. And I'm thinking that we tend to think from this, let me continue calling it scientific point of view that's so prevalent today. We tend to project into the past, to extrapolate from our current experience. We say, oh, therefore it must have always been the same. In what sense do I mean this? I mean it in the sense that this scientific science and esoterics are two separate aspects of life. History and myth are things that have nothing to do with each other, because history is real and myth is fake. Science is real and magic is fake. But that is exactly the mistake that the Atlanteans made, and exactly the lesson that we probably need to integrate in our times today, and in relation to this window of time that you seem to agree that we are in, that is connecting our times today. I mean, there's this idea that we are, some of us, I don't know if I would be one, but because of the affinity with the subject, I probably am, and probably all of us were in some time, we are reincarnations of people that lived in Atlantis. Maybe we were the ones that got it wrong. Maybe we were the ones that hurt many people. Maybe we were the other side, perhaps, or this more intermediate side that was like warning people about this and trying to do stuff to help bridge at that time. Despite what kind of side we were in back then, today many of us are like, we have this, you know, when you've made a mistake, you gain experience, and so our souls kind of remember the mistake that was made in that time and got some experience from it, and came now during this time that seems to have a kind of timeline connection with them, so as not to repeat that mistake. And I'll let you comment on this as well, but I want us to get back to the 1800s for just a moment. I feel like from my research, it seems like in the 1800s, perhaps it was something that was very, very novel at the time, but all these ideas of Atlantis and a different kind of view of human evolution and the cycles of time seemed to be more prevalent back then, and we don't remember that. We seem to, again, this extrapolation into the past, we seem to believe that in the past people just thought exactly like we do today. But for me, what happened is that at some point, or in some period between the 19th and the 20th century, perhaps it's connected to the world wars, very probably, there was some kind of rubbing off and erasing or modification of the general public's opinion or view. And we were indoctrinated into this idea that nobody has ever considered these subjects as valid, or just a small fringe of people. But when I start looking at stuff, the esoteric side of the 1800s was very, very relevant during the times.
Absolutely, no, and there was I think also a time of unveiling, meaning like lifting the veil on many of these ancient mysteries after all the repression of, well, if you think about, even without going as far as the Middle Ages, but even during like the modern period with the like Inquisition, the repression of the church, it was really like mostly like during the 18th, 19th century, a time when lots of these suppressed knowledge or secret knowledge as well came back into the public. So it was a stage, an epoch of unveiling in a certain way of the mystery, which is not to say that this knowledge did not exist before then, but it for the first time became again accessible, became again public with a number of movements like the Theosophical movement, for instance, and then moving into the 20th century anthroposophy. There were a number of mystery and esoteric schools that took on a really strong interest in Atlantis, in the question of the origin of civilization, the spiritual origins of mankind. And I think this is a process that continues also today. So, and it's actually, I think, part of the interest in Atlantis, in ancient lost civilization that is so prevalent today. And something you also mentioned earlier about this coexistence between both, on the one hand, like scientific Atlantology and the esoteric Atlantology. Reality is that up until pretty the late 1800s, Atlantis was a subject of scientific debate. There was actually lots of serious scientific discussion, many serious scientists that dedicated time and research into the subject of Atlantis, like the scientific evidence for it. And it was only in the period between the two world wars and after the Second World War that it started to be gradually pushed into the fringe of history, of archaeology. That's pretty much where the subject is relegated now. But I do think that we are now at the edge of a paradigm shift. I do think they were now very close to a radical reconsideration of the subject of Atlantis, of ancient lost civilization, in light of many recent discoveries. One being, as I said, that of Göbekli Tepe, the existence of fairly advanced civilization at the end of the last ice age. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis that strongly suggests the possibility of a massive cataclysm in the Earth's recent geological past, also roughly at the same time as Plato situates the sinking and the destruction of Atlantis. All this research is now going on into ancient technology as well, like the evidence of ancient technology in places like Egypt, in Peru, with like lots of scientific research, very thorough scientific studies, trying to replicate in a way this remarkable achievement that again seem to point to the existence of advanced scientific, not even technological knowledge in the remote past. I think all of these is eventually going to change the paradigm. Now, I'm not suggesting this is going to happen overnight. It will take definitely several more years, maybe decades before that happens. I do think we are truly at the edge of a massive paradigm shift in our understanding of prehistory and the origins of human civilization.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm happy that you mentioned this idea of the paradigm shift. I remember learning about the concept of paradigm shift in high school in philosophy when I was like, I don't know, 16, 17. And it was a very interesting idea. But since then, up until today, there's like this ominous or this kind of pressure that is felt. Like I remember the analogy that I was taught, I think it's from Kant. It's that a paradigm shift is when the boat is starting to sink and it's got holes all over the place, and they start pasting small band-aids or stuff like to fix the holes, but eventually it's got so many holes that it can't hold anymore, and it just gives in, and then the paradigm shift happens. And it feels like we've I don't mean we as because but the current system or mainstream has been patching up so many holes for, I mean, I'm this thing that I'm talking about in philosophy class. It's like almost 20 years now since that time. I'm thinking I'm 30, 34, 30, yeah, 34. So the ship has been sinking for almost 20 years, and probably a lot more, but at least in my consciousness, it's been that long, and it's been like building and building with the ideas of quantum physics and the new kind of interpretations or understandings that there have been around quantum theory connected to healing in particular. You know, people like Joe Dispenza and stuff that's connecting this more. I think this is you know, the part of the meditation and the yoga stuff. These are areas that are kind of in between esoteric and scientific, and which are probably helping to also bridge this, because you can talk about that stuff and say, okay, so let's think about yoga. Okay, yeah, it's kind of stretching or building muscle, whatever, but there is this component of consciousness, and consciousness, we are now understanding its connection to the quantum field. And all of this stuff can also be understood as the astral realm. So, slowly we are seeing these small rocks or bricks that are creating a path between the two hemispheres of the brain, which is exactly that balance between the scientific and the esoteric. And we look at, again, at yoga, for example, and where did that science come from? It's like, okay, maybe one day I can just invent a kind of exercise. Okay, yeah, sure, it can just come up one day, but then it's got to have some kind of evolution where it starts getting used by people and more expanded around the country, around the world, and eventually it gets like its mature form, and that gets passed on through time. But with yoga, I know we don't have every Sanskrit text. I mean, we have very little Sanskrit texts already translated, so there might be some evidence in them of this evolution, but it feels like the Sumerian stuff you were mentioning. It's like, boom, it's here, it's already complete, it's already mature. There doesn't seem to be an evolution. So we think about these civilizations and we say, okay, they are 3,000, 6,000 years old. Okay, but let's say that the pyramids are, I don't really know how old they are assumed to be by the mainstream, but let's say they are like 5,000 years old or whatever. What about the evolution of a civilization that one day can build that? It needs, I don't know, hundreds of years, thousands of years before. And those things are like not considered sometimes. So I'm kind of going off the rails here, but yeah, would you like to comment something?
Yeah, absolutely. No, and that's the paradox, right? So that knowledge could not have appeared out of nowhere, right? If you think about the pyramids, of course, they are a great example. Also, some other really remarkable scientific achievements of ancient civilization.
Which, let me just add one thing, which even if it were like channeled, you know, like channeling through a higher entity or a god or a whatever, even if it was downloaded psychically, okay, perfect. It comes, but then it needs to be built, and there's like lots of time that's not accounted for in archaeology, because they like see the date when, for example, Göbekli Tepe was buried, correct? And they can kind of date that time, and they say, oh, so Göbekli Tepe is X years old, but it was buried then. How much? When was it built? We don't know that, correct?
Well, that's the paradox, because if you go to sites like Göbekli Tepe, the Giza pyramids, the oldest layers of construction, also the most sophisticated, which is entirely contrary to our paradigm of cultural evolution. So we're all taught by this process of biological evolution, also cultural evolution. You go from like simpler forms of organization towards more complex forms of society and of culture, but that's not what you find in the archaeological record. If you go to a place like Göbekli Tepe, The earliest layers of construction have been dated to between 9,500 and 9,000 BC, and based on organic materials that were found at the site. They are also the most sophisticated. There you find the use of colossal stone blocks, these massive T-shaped pillars, some of which weigh in excess of 20 tons. There is even one weighing over 50 tons. They're perfectly carved with a remarkable ornamentation, what could be even interpreted as proto-hieroglyphic writing, all these symbols that cover the pillars. And then over the following centuries, it's as if of those people, they got steadily and increasingly worse at temple building. So you see a decadence rather than evolution. You find that the enclosures become smaller, the construction is much rougher, they use smaller stones, the construction is not accurate, up until the point when around 7,500 years BC, all construction stopped altogether, and the site was ritually buried. You find very similar process in Egypt as well, where the most sophisticated, the most complex pyramids that we cannot really explain, like Giza pyramids, for instance, the Great Pyramid, was also one of the earliest that were built. And then if you move on to the time of later dynasties, during the 5th, the 6th dynasty, these pyramids are basically piles of rubble right now. They were not as accurately constructed. They were much smaller to begin with. They did not have a solid masonry core. So you definitely see a decadence. And of course, like archaeologists, historians try to explain these. There's a number of factors like economic collapse, warfare. But the reality is that there is a fundamental paradox that there is clearly very advanced knowledge that was somehow transmitted to these ancient civilizations, was already there since the very beginning of these civilizations. We do not find any period of cultural development or any period of evolution. Another prime example to me is the very surprising geodetic knowledge that is embedded in many of these ancient monuments. If you talk about knowledge of the fundamental measurements of the earth, it is now a well-known fact that, for instance, that the megalithic yard, which was one of the key units of measurements employed by the megalithic builders of Western Europe, is also related to the Egyptian royal cubit, which was employed by the pyramid builders. So all these units of measurements, they are exact fractions of the Earth's radius or the Earth's circumference. So that suggests that whoever created these units, which again, they appear already fully formed, there is no evolution whatsoever of these units, these people certainly already possessed a very complete and precise knowledge of the fundamental dimensions of the Earth. Knowledge has not been acquired by our own civilization until the 17th or 18th century. So you have to wonder, where did that knowledge come from? Where did it originate?
And also symbols, right? So there's symbols that the scientific side might say that's just part of the esoteric woo-woo that has no use, but there's symbols that were clearly, because of where we find them, they were clearly important for these civilizations, and that are still being used by us today. An example is this, the flower of life, from which we can derive lots of understanding or even wisdom, lots of inner knowledge, inner standing as well of who we are, what is our role here. There's information and stuff coded into all of these astrology, the astrological wheel with the 12. I mean, that's a great mystery. Why the 12 particular symbols that we have, and why across cultures, why do we even, when we start actually researching if astrology is woo-woo or if it's real, when you start looking into it and you start seeing that it kind of has an effect on your life, or there is some correlations, just to put it mildly. But when you start looking into that, and you realize the ancients also had these things in their toolkit, you know, and it's just amazing how I'm really happy that we're starting as a culture to starting to put into the forefront this paradigm shift, I called the show Mystic Times because a couple, 2-3 years ago, I saw this kind of wave. And so I decided, okay, this is what I'm gonna call the show, because I see this is growing and I wanna share stuff that helps put more rocks in that side of the balance, let's say. But then there was this sudden stop that we all had to be locked away, and kind of like when they say you're crazy and they lock you away. This kind of happened as a civilization, probably a kind of, it was it's still going on, this worldwide thing that happened 2 years ago already. And it feels like, on the one hand, wow, some movement, we start, some shaking started happening, that this potentially hidden hand felt, okay, we gotta put the brakes on that very early on before it continues to grow. And it's been growing since, for example, you mentioned the Younger Dryas. I remember hearing about that first time from Graham Hancock.
Mm-hmm.
So people like him started to put this stuff on the map, but I think they were smart in not going directly to say, therefore Atlantis. No, they were just presenting the evidence, which was very smart.
Right.
But then more esoteric people, or I wouldn't say like more esoteric, like they are not esoteric, but I mean more or less scientifically educated people like myself started maybe making those connections, oh,
right.
Therefore Atlantis, oh, let's look at that. And I think that's why a kind of brake was put on the wheels of this paradigm shift. But at the same time, I'm very happy, and I think I mentioned this in a previous show, I'm very happy that I always trust that the universe has our back. And if there was a pause or a slowdown put on us, it's because we needed to not. Sometimes I feel like the male aspect, the left brain is kind of tends to like devour stuff and not process it enough. So the universe said, okay, you are kind of onto something now. Digest this food before you start preaching about it or telling everybody how good this food is. Look into it. So go inside, stay in your home, and look within. I think it was a very great time of awakening, of looking inside. That's something that I take from the situation we've been through in the last couple of years.
Yeah, and I think it again goes back to this idea of a cyclical time and like different cycles of creation in a way, so that when a civilization has exhausted its possibilities, it's time to transition into something new. And I very much think that our own civilization has now pretty much exhausted the capabilities or the potential of the rational mind. I think what we have done, particularly Western civilization, is really cultivating rationality to its extreme, almost like materialism. And these are like very scientist, materialistic culture. And so, as always in history, when you reach that tipping point, then the balance also flips to the opposite side. So that's probably the reason why so many people right now they're dissatisfied with the mainstream view of science, like very materialistic culture. Are much more driven towards like spirituality, even like ancient forms of spirituality as well. So the tips of the scale, they're almost like inevitably destined to flip one more time. And I think we're very close to one such transition point. And now, something interesting you also mentioned about paradigm shift, and there is, by the way, a wonderful book by Thomas Kuhn on the structure of scientific revolution, so where he talks about all this idea of shifting paradigm, what it takes to go from what he calls ordinary science to revolutionary science. I think on the one hand, if you again like compare the mainstream view of science, and particularly in the discipline, the field of archaeology and history, to a boat, that boat is now full of holes. It's just starting to take in more and more water and sinking. All this new evidence has been brought forth from across a range of different fields, from archaeology, geology, Göbekli Tepe, the Younger Dryas cataclysm. I think it's causing that boat to sink. But at the same time, I think scientists, they are worried because they see that boat, that paradigm sinking, but they do not see an alternative paradigm. They do not see yet an alternative boat which they would feel comfortable jumping onto. And I think that's part of the job, the task in a way of our generation. Part of what really motivated me to write this book as well is to provide an alternative view, provide an alternative paradigm. Of course, this is work that will take very many generations to be completed. There is so much that needs to be built, but I think we need to start now building that framework, that structure of a new paradigm that will replace the old one that is proving increasingly inadequate.
I think I agree with what you're saying. It's very important because I think what's important is to create this kind of bridge between the two hemispheres. I keep thinking of, there's this song by the Canadian band Rush, which is called Hemispheres, and it kind of talks about this dance. And it's so important to create this bridge between them, because the idea here is not that it's one side versus the other. That is precisely what we are moving away from. We kind of tend to think in polar opposites all the time. And so people think that a revolution has happened when you go from one pole to the other, in the detriment of the previous pole. But actually what we need to do is to go to a kind of pole that includes both poles, not that.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, we need to take one step back or look it from one level higher and see, oh, we keep doing this, but on that side always we're doing this. And what we need to do is include also this side and do a balance that's kind of larger or more stable in the center between.
Right. Yeah, it's really finding the balance, because you shift from the extremes, right? But you need to have knowledge of those extremes. So that maybe a way of thinking about the overall process of human evolution, of cultural evolution of our species. Like, we have to explore both extremes, like the extreme of, let's say, like spirituality, the extreme of materialistic science, in order to find the common ground, to find the balance. That is what can really trigger evolution and progress.
Yeah, totally. And this new paradigm definitely needs to be a move from competition to collaboration. This is an idea that I got from this amazing mind that helped me evolve so much. His name is Terence McKenna. You may have heard about him.
Mm-hmm.
And
yep.
The idea of going from competition to collaboration, that is like so paradigm shifting, so mind expanding. We don't need to be against the mainstream or fight the people that don't see things the way we see them. We actually need to help them see the way we see. And there's definitely so much that can be still learned from the rational mind. Of course, it's not something that isn't there or that isn't valuable. But what we and the work that you're doing, this bridging, I'm trying to find the correct words. We are not in a battle against the current system. We are like planting seeds to make it more balanced, to make it more stable, more inclusive, more evolved. And like you say, they don't see what the alternative might be, because all they see within their they don't see how they are limited in their scope, like the horse with the things here. They don't see, all they see, because they look it from their telescope, from their tunnel, they don't see how the alternative, which is esoterics, how that has anything to do. Esoterics is like for stupid people with what you call it with superstition, for superstitious stupid people. So there is no alternative to what we are doing, because there is none. And when you present the other side, they say, no, that doesn't even compete in the same arena for them. But we are bridging this gap with the stuff you're doing, with, like I said, Joe Dispenza. For example, in the case of his work, how he's explaining the chakras, the energy centers, and connecting that to what we are doing is connecting the astral with the physical. We are showing, because we're in such a materialistic culture, we need to show that the astral has actually an impact on the physical, because if it doesn't, it's just useless. Because we must admit we are living a human or a physical experience. So there needs to be, it needs to be relevant for the human experience, this new paradigm, because what we are suggesting is not something that is, okay, let's all just migrate to the astral and leave the physical behind. That's a kind of immature view, or a beginner's, novice's view. When you're starting in the spiritual journey, you're like, oh, so enlightenment means like you leave your body and your body drops and the body dies and you are, no, that's not it. We are here in this human, and in this human experience, we need to honor this experience, because there's a reason why the astral chose to become material. And since the processing implies a kind of forgetting what it's done, since it's flat down into the ground, another person her name is coming now, is Sue Morter, Dr. Sue Morter. I would like to have her on the show as well. She's also talking about this. She's like for me, she's like the female version of Joe Dispenza, and she talks about how the spirit or the soul falls and splats on the ground and just gets like spread all over, and then it needs to like recollect its energy and become more centered and more focused and remember who it is. And we are exactly in that process. I think we are starting to cultivate within ourselves this awareness of both the physical, or what I call the first person perspective, and the third person perspective, which would be the soul looking from outside of time, looking down. Okay, that sounds very esoteric and woo-woo for a left-brained kind of person, but that is precisely the thing, is that this part of ourselves that we have forsaken or kind of forgotten, this part of the self is more of a symbolic kind of logic. It speaks in symbols, in myths, in dreams, in images, and right, the symbols that we are finding all over the world. This part of the mind, we have relegated it and said, no, it's useless because it speaks in a different language. And I think part of I studied translation and didn't work too much in that area, because I understood for my toolkit, oh, I am learning to translate something else. And so my point is, this part of ourself speaks in a different language, which is probably part of what we need to bridge with the more rational minds of our time.
Yeah, I think this actually brings us back to the core of the Atlantis story. Again, according to Plato, like this idea that the Atlanteans were originally like divine humans. So this idea of the incarnation of a divine principle into man, which is foundational to Plato's Atlantis story. And then the process of decadence that eventually led to the downfall of Atlantis, to a fall into materialism. It's actually, I think, quite significant, the fact that Plato suggests the reason for the fall of Atlantis was truly a fall into materialism, the fact that the Atlanteans had basically forgotten their divine origins, that like spiritual origins of their civilization had become increasingly diluted through this process of a fall into matter, that actually Plato himself says that to an outside observer, the Atlanteans would have looked at the peak of their power and their civilization, but to an observer of truth, to the philosopher, they truly reached the bottom of their spiritual and material degradation. So you still have this picture of a very wealthy, very advanced society, was clearly scientific, technologically advanced, almost bringing this aspect of material science to an extreme at the expense of spirituality and spiritual personal evolution, and that's what led them to their downfall. So again, I also find in these admonitions a cautionary tale for our own civilization as well. It's going down very much the same path as Atlantis and as our Atlantean ancestors.
Yeah, without the benefit of having these demigods around us, because they did have that, and even so, they ended up devolving into madness, into separation, into destruction. So it's amazing that you bring this part of the conversation, you bring it up, because I would like us. One thing that I'm trying to build is a kind of timeline, okay? But I'm starting from the very basics, you're studying archaeology, and I'm putting the younger dryas. So I'm trying to create this because it helps me very much to understand where we are, to build this timeline. So without necessarily, of course, we are not very certain of the time periods, and they seem to be extremely large, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of years. On the show, I've had the forbidden archaeologist. I'm blanking on his name right now, but he has Michael Grimo. He has investigated evidence of human footprints, or the footprint of a boot in layers of the earth that are millions of years old. So there is slowly evidence even of that coming up. I would like to try to understand this Atlantean society at whichever point you would like of their story, of their cycle. So I understand there's themes of the psyche and psychic abilities. There's the theme of the priesthood. There's corruption. There's also migration and colonization. Would you paint us kind of a picture of the Atlantean timeline, if you will?
Well, again, I wouldn't go as far back as millions of years ago, but definitely think about the origin of anatomically modern humans. At least now the mainstream consensus is that modern humans have been around for at least 150,000 years, and probably much more than that. So but I don't think it's beyond the realm of possibility what is in fact suggested by the esoteric tradition, by many ancient sources.
Again, maybe the oldest bones are 150,000 years old.
Right.
So we say, or scientists say, therefore 150 is the. But I mean, if a bone was found from that age, who knows?
Right. It's been
earlier?
constantly pushed back in time. Yeah. It's been constantly pushed back in time. So I don't think that the timeline or the time frames provided by esoteric cosmology talk about modern humans, or this time, if you believe in Plato's account, for instance, this idea of the incarnation of the divine principle in man occurred around 400,000 years ago, or around 500,000 years ago, according to some sources. I think that's very much in line, actually quite compatible with the accepted paradigm of human evolution. Now, what it suggests is that during the first Atlantean period, that's when the first anatomically modern humans appeared. And what it also suggests in the book is the possibility that yet unknown human ancestor or human species actually developed on a now sunken mid-Atlantic landmass. And that was the trigger that prompted that process of accelerated evolution throughout the course of the past 500,000 years, that led us to that led to us, basically to modern humans, to Homo sapiens, through interbreeding with different species, but having at its core this genetic element brought by Atlantean humanity. And so during that first Atlantean period is when the first anatomically modern human appeared on Atlantis, and then they went on to colonize different lands. Now, much of what is suggested also by evolutionary theory, by the latest research in anthropology, is that what used to be considered as like separate human or hominin species, like Neanderthal men, for instance, Denisovans, Homo floresiensis, did in fact all intermix with each other, was clearly interbreeding, so that I think now we're shifting towards a view in which anatomically modern humans, rather than being a pure species in a way, are in fact like hybrid species, result of hybridization. So I don't find it entirely unlikely or beyond the realm of possibility to assume that a yet unknown human ancestor, what we may call Atlantean man, was in a way one of the earliest ancestors, if not the most important ancestor of anatomically modern humans, through a process of interbreeding and mixing with other hominin species. Now, of course, throughout this very long period of time, we must think that many Atlantean civilizations developed on Atlantis. And that's why the title of the book is The Empires of Atlantis. In fact, certainly Atlantean civilization went through multiple cycles of cultural development, of evolution, of downfall. There were certainly several cataclysms. Now, the Younger Dryas cataclysm is probably the most recent in order of time. But there were several others that are remembered, both in historical documents, in ancient kings lists, in the esoteric tradition. One of the major cataclysms would have occurred around 35,000 years BC. It was a cataclysm known as the Fall in most ancient accounts, that coincided with the first major sinking of land in the mid-Atlantic Ocean, the first wave of colonization outside of Atlantis. It was a time of spiritual decadence of Atlantean civilization, which the original center of civilization, the original mid-Atlantic center, actually broke up into two separate centers. There was one that remained on Atlantis, embracing some of the more materialistic aspects of Atlantean civilization, and then a new center of civilization was established in Central Asia, in the region now occupied by the Gobi Desert. And again, this is a very important, almost foundational myth of theosophy. For instance, how much of the 19th century and 20th century esoteric tradition, this idea of two poles of civilization, one in the mid-Atlantic Ocean that still belonged with the previous cycle, the Atlantean pole, and another pole of creation, which again in the language of theosophy is called the Aryan pole. That was really like the original seat of modern humanity in Central Asia. So that throughout much of what they call the Second Atlantean period lasted from approximately 35,000 years BC up until the time of the Younger Dryas cataclysm. You see a confrontation, a war almost between these two different poles of civilization, the original Aryan pole, the original Atlantean pole and the Aryan pole of civilization. That again, if you believe many of the ancient texts, the ancient sources, might have led to the use of destructive weapons to an all-out war between these two factions, further contributed to the decadence and the downfall of Atlantean civilization, up until the point around 10,900 years BC, when the Younger Dryas cataclysm actually caused the final and the last major sinking of land in the mid-Atlantic Ocean. So that was the time when the largest part of the Atlantean mainland actually sunk, triggering massive migrations of peoples outside of Atlantis and a colonization, an Atlantean colonization, places as far away as Egypt, as South America. And then what followed was what they call the Neo-Atlantean period, in which Atlantean civilization now separated from the mainland, actually creating a number of Neo-Atlantean civilizations were modeled on the civilization of the motherland, but at the same time, they lacked the technology, they lacked the sustenance to sustain themselves, so they fell into that process of decadence that we find at places like Göbekli Tepe, as we talked about. But in a way, and I think that's also something important to keep in mind. Atlantean civilization did not vanish overnight. It was a civilization that spanned tens of thousands of years. So that it did not vanish in a single day and night. The influence, the cultural influence of Atlantean civilization, it lasted for thousands and thousands of years, even after the fall of Atlantis. And we can say in a way that it still continues today. In a way, I think that our own civilization is in a sense a neo-Atlantean civilization, because we are the direct descendants of those Atlanteans, of that civilization. That's where we're also called to resurrecting, in a way, much of that knowledge of that lost civilization.
Yeah, and you also brought up another very feared term, that Aryan word. Is a word that
yes. I'm
wonder,
using it in the language of theosophy, right? So
yeah.
I think it's important, like, to set things straight on this point, which has pretty much nothing to do with any like racial views, or like with the Aryan, like it was like during like Nazism, for instance. It was just like a term. Maybe now it's let's say a scientifically obsolete term, but it's really like synonymous for Indo-European. That's like the way it was used in the language of theosophy. It's really a way of describing the modern humanity. If you actually read much of the writings of Blavatsky and the Secret Doctrine in Isis Unveiled, she talks about Aryan humanity as really like all of modern humanity, is like encompassing all of modern humanity, independent of ethnicity, independent of our modern concepts of race. So it's really a way, it's more of a spiritual characteristic than any like ethnic or racial characteristic.
Yeah, and but in fact, of course, it goes again muddied up and mixed up with these very unfortunate events that at least we are told happened in the 20th century. I mean, of course, it's like such a difficult area to touch, because you need to make like 100 notes before you say anything, just so people don't think you are this, right, or you are not that, you are not that.
Right.
But I'm not disputing whatever did or didn't happen. I'm more disputing the story that has come down to us about whatever did or didn't happen after the like from theosophy, when these subjects or these terms were more accepted, or more I think you used the word more seriously debated, these topics, and more you said it's kind of a scientifically obsolete term now, but it has become obsolete because it got mixed up with all of that. So now it's like politically incorrect to use those terms, which not too long ago was just the norm. But of course, something crazy happened in the middle, and it's a shame, because it kind of, when you read these texts from the 1800s, etc., it's easier to understand it when you have like given names, like you mentioned, not mentioned, but you alluded to the idea of the first Atlantean period, etc. And I remember from some theosophical writings that there's different root races of humanity. So the cycles, root races, which have at the same time they have sub races, and they have a kind of evolution that goes up to a peak and then goes down again, etc. And they each have names, and I find these names like amazing, because many of the names kind of map to stuff that we still know today.
They really help our understanding. That's why I sometimes like use that same language, even though, as I said, it might be like scientifically obsolete right now, because I think it's just a much more clear way of like talking about some of these concepts, even though it may not necessarily be politically correct. I think the whole question of Atlantis, I think it has fallen into this realm of political incorrectness, just fundamentally this idea of a lost advanced civilization, the broad culture throughout the world, is intrinsically a reflection of like, at least like for those who believe this just like a politically incorrect worldview. It's just like a reflection of European colonialism in a certain way. Like these great civilization that went on and colonized, which doesn't mean it's incorrect, by the way. But I think that many scientists would almost automatically shun away from this concept of Atlantis, of an ancient lost advanced civilization, just because it's politically incorrect. So I think we're in a certain way a victim of our own, of this whole like political correctness in a way.
Yeah, and for me, it's something that's I try to be very, very careful in how I express myself when I'm talking about these kinds of subjects, because I understand that in these days, me looking the way that I look, or my body or my genes being what they are, somebody might hear me say at the start I dared to mention the word swastika, and I was like, before we started, before you even came on for the show, I was thinking, do I dare, when I mentioned the flower of life, do I dare mention this other thing? And I'm trying to cross those barriers, because they are fears that I have, and I know I'm not using the word swastika or the word Aryan, like you were talking about, in this such destructive way.
Right.
I'm using it from this other like 1800 perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that this goes on to create and perpetuate also many taboos, right? So nobody can talk about this and that because it's politically incorrect. Like Atlantis is politically incorrect, so we should not be talking about that. But I think we're just doing ourselves a big disservice. I think definitely we need to have a critical view. We need to have an acknowledgement of the horrible things that were done in the past in the name of race or ethnicity. But I think we also need to move on and be ready, like to look at the evidence and approach some of these concepts from a new angle. I don't think there should be any taboos in science.
Yeah, we need to move on, and we need to in this perspective of community, we need to also learn and understand that, okay, some people still we need to hold space for people who are not ready to make that leap, because we have been put I'm trying to find the word in English. We have been put against each other, so white versus black versus yellow versus red versus whatever versus brown, etc., all different colors, when we're all one. And since some groups have been, like, perhaps more recently and more horribly discriminated, destroyed, etc., some people are very identified with that aspect of their bodies, of their family, of their genetics. But one thing that I want to point out is that I see this kind of polarization between people, and I also see this kind of, I don't mean to get negative, but I see this force that is dividing us. We are just all brothers and sisters. There's been, like you say, interbreeding between the different like colors or shapes of humans in prehistory, etc. And we're all a very strange family with very different cousins and etc. And I feel like there is this extra thing, which in the end, it's probably another aspect of ourselves we haven't incorporated. This thing that is pitching us against each other, and we need to eventually move through this painful part of the process of evolution that is now in the basket of political correctness or incorrectness.
Yep. And I think if anything, the message of Atlantis is one of a universal, of a global civilization. Many of our modern concepts, again, like race or ethnicity, did not even exist or surface until long after the fall of Atlantean civilization itself. So I think it's entirely absurd to assign, even like many books, many authors have tried to assign like specific race or ethnicity to the Atlanteans. I think that's entirely absurd, and this is something that was already very well described. If you go back to some of the earliest theosophical writings of Blavatsky, when she talks about the Atlantean civilization, the Atlantean race, she did not assign it to a specific ethnicity at all. So very much in the same way as how would we describe our own modern civilization? There are like so many different ethnicities, so many different languages and cultures that make it up. But we still feel in a way they were part of global civilization or a universal civilization. So I don't see why it would have been different in the case of Atlantean civilization. There might have been actually many different Atlantean civilizations existing at the same time. They were still like part of that whole, of that like a global culture, of that global civilization.
Well, Marco Vigato, thank you. This has been such a pleasure. We actually were able to do a pretty great overview of the thing and bring up some very interesting points. I hope we can do this again very soon. I had a great time.
Totally.
And I also hope that you had a great time too. Grazie, and I hope that people, they are able to, if somebody is like this word we are using today, if somebody is being triggered by certain words, by certain pieces of information, I invite them to research it a little bit more. You talk, for example, of humanity being a hybrid species. People go and look into this because it's one of these things that you shouldn't maybe touch, but I'm going to touch it just at the end. So people are left with their minds feeling, and they are, some of them are feel the invitation to look into it, but the idea of the out of Africa theory seems to not be supported by the evidence, and that doesn't mean that therefore a certain race is bad or nothing like that.
Right.
We are trying to find the physical evolution of humanity, just to understand who we are, what mistakes we've done in the past, what correct things we've done before, and to replicate what's serving us and to not repeat the mistakes that didn't serve us. So yeah, I'm very happy for this conversation. It's given me so much to think about, so much more clarity, and yeah, I'm happy to find somebody else with whom we can talk about this stuff.
Right, Rafa. No, it's been a pleasure, really.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody. Oh, please, Marco, share if you would like to share any links to the website. You mentioned a book. Just point people towards that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have my own website. It's www.marcovigato.com. There you can find information about my work, my latest book, The Emperors of Atlantis. That's available in bookstores throughout the US and internationally through Simon & Schuster, and also on Amazon, of course. I also have my own blog I invite you to follow. It's called Uncharted Ruins. And I also have recently established a foundation. It's called the Arts Project, that aims to actually uncovering some of the physical evidence of ancient lost civilizations throughout the world. So we actively sponsor and fund expeditions globally in search of the remnants of ancient advanced lost civilization. You can find much more information about that both on the blog, on the website, about my latest exploration and my latest research.
Amazing. So again, I encourage people to look into the information that was kind of hard to swallow. Look into Marco's foundation and check out his book. And yeah, we again, this is such a juicy topic. I'm looking here at my notes. I wrote with a question mark. I wrote Thoth, so the Egyptian Thoth. There's a connection there. Egypt, the Basque, the Celts, the Aryans, the Hindus, the Persians. There's like so much to explore in a future conversation. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Marco.
Well, the book actually runs over 400 pages long. It's really just an introduction to the topic. As I say, I think you can write probably hundreds of books on this subject, and that I might do at some point. I'm actually working also on a follow-up book, because there is so much that can be discussed. But what they try to do really with this book is creating that framework of a new paradigm, right? I think that's what they try to do. I hope I've accomplished that at least in part. But there is definitely like so much that needs to be done to actually like start building on top of that framework, and it will be the work of several generations, I'm sure.
Yeah, of course, that is amazing. And there's also, I would like to invite people to check out, there's books from the 1800s that are actually available online. They are free because of the copyright or whatever, they are becoming available. And I'm very much encouraging people to look into all this research, because it's actually extremely relevant and interesting, even if just to learn about the potential pitfalls of humanity, of forgetting our heart and focusing so much in the mind and therefore on matter. So yeah, well, this has been an amazing episode. Thank you very much, Marco, and thank you everybody for being there with us. We will see you soon in another episode. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Rafa.